watching the Forefront Church video podcast. And wherever you're at viewing online, we just want to say thank you and welcome. And one of the ways that we can help connect with you is we want to hear from you and where you're at and how we can help. And so head over to forefrontchurch.info after the message and click the Connect tab. It's a great way for us to help you along your spiritual journey as you connect with God and learn about Jesus. And so sit back, relax. We hope that you're challenged and encouraged from today's message.
Well, good morning and welcome. How y'all doing today? Excuse me. Welcome. My name is Dan. I'm really glad to be here today. And we are continuing our series, our 5-week series called I Love the 90s. And here's how we got there to that title. So there's this big, gigantic writing in the middle of the Old Testament called Psalms. And Psalms is just another word for song or poem. And within that little group of the great big group is a group of Psalms 90 through 99 that we're going to be looking at through this series. So we thought we would call it I Love the 90s, and we would take a little tongue-in-cheek look back to the decade that was the 90s. I don't know if any of you remember the 90s or not. Some of you might. Some of you weren't even born yet, which is a little depressing for those of us with grayer hair. But, depending on how you look at it, you might have been raising kids at the time or starting your career. Maybe you started the decade as a child and just sort of grew up through the 90s. I don't know what your situation was, but it's kind of cool to look back and see what was going on during that time. The 90s for me were very much a whirlwind time. We were right in sort of the meat of raising kids. We entered the decade in 1990. I was 27 years old. Woo! That was a long time ago. 27 years old, and we had our first child, and a couple years later, we had our second child who actually just got married this year. It makes you feel really old, and we're just kind of chugging through life there. My sweet grandparents, who were all born in the early 20th century, passed on during that decade. Was working hard in my career. The 90s were the decade that my football team that I root for did something that no team has ever done before, since, or ever. The Buffalo Bills went to 4 straight Super Bowls, which was awesome. And thank you for completing my sentence. I appreciate that. There's some people that don't know the whole story. They lost all 4 straight Super Bowls. That has never been done before, although the Cleveland Cavaliers are getting pretty close to doing that in basketball. But anyway, it was, it was kind of the way the 90s was for me. Actually, the 90s for me was a little bit of a kind of a lost decade. While there were lots of things going on, I was not around a lot. And this is why I wasn't around very much, because I was here. That's where I was. I was on all of these ships throughout the 90s. Literally, 90% of the 90s was spent on one of these things, which means I wasn't here very much. I was just sort of dipping in and out when I wasn't at sea. So this one is now at the bottom of the ocean right off of Florida. They sunk it, made it a reef, which is kind of cool. They sold this one for $6 to a scrap metal yard in Brownsville, Texas, so it doesn't even exist anymore. We sold this one to a foreign navy, and it promptly caught on fire. I don't know what happened there. And this is the only one that's left that's still around and brand new when I was on it, but I was just not home. I was gone all the time, and so a lot of the stuff that was happening in the 90s was a little lost on me. Like, there's some movies I've never seen before. I've never really seen The Lion King, Aladdin, Blair Witch Project, Pretty Woman, The Matrix. The only movie I really actually remember well is Forrest Gump, because I was a lieutenant in the Navy in the time, and my name is Dan, so for like 2 years it's like, Lieutenant Dan! It was incessant. It was a little bit annoying all at the same time. And then music was very, very strange to me. Like, we came out of the 80s in a rough patch with Vanilla Ice. Like, that's how we ended the 80s, which if you don't know who that is, I'm not even sure I would have you waste your time Googling that. And then we were in the 90s, and I disappeared for a couple years, and I arrived back, and all the music's angry, like grunge is going. Like, why did all these people get so angry, And then Jason mentioned ska music last week. Like, that's weird. Angry people with trombones. I don't know. That's the only thing I could think of. And then we end the decade with boy bands. Like, whoo, that was a rough time. Like, I'm for transcendent artists. Like the Stones, the Boss, James Taylor. They don't have to make a comeback because they've sort of always been there for like 5 or 6 decades now. So, but anyway, that's kind of the way the 90s was for me. From what I'm told is that it was sort of a flashy decade. There was a lot of colorful things and strange music and movies, and technology was emerging. We started seeing computers and stuff like that kind of take hold. But a lot of times when we look back in time at a time period where we were growing up or whatever, we always look at what was going on outwardly. Like, if you ever come across some photographs from way back in the day, and you're kind of looking through them, like going like, man, what was I thinking getting that haircut? Like, what was there? Or you go, I actually think I still have those pants somewhere. I don't wear them. Whatever it is, we look back and we kind of look at the outward changes that occurred. But I'm wondering, like, when you look back in decades or times in your life, do you look at how maybe you evolved inwardly? Think about that for a minute. How did you evolve inwardly? And this is why Psalms 90 through 99 are really good, because they help us to take a look at how we evolve inwardly. Now, the Psalms are awesome because they will lay out for you every possible human emotion there is. It's a place where I send people all the time to go read when they're struggling. And we all have difficulty. We all have rough patches. It's tough out there sometimes. So I send people to the Psalms because there's 150 chapters where we read about everything that could go on in the human condition. And what we really read about in there is God and who He is and what He is and His impact on the world and His creative genius in the world. And then we read a lot about how we interact with God in the pages of those Psalms. And what we read is that God is in the middle of our lives and that He really, really cares about us. And that's an overarching message, something that you're going to hear from us. And honestly, it should be something you hear from every church. And it should be something you hear from everybody who claims God is who they follow. So we're going to take a look at a little tiny little psalm, Psalm 93. It's one of my favorites. It's only got 5 verses, but it's very, very powerful in its message. And we're going to talk today about being ready. But before we get going, let's pray. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for our graduating seniors and their lives and what's ahead. And we thank you that we get to come here and take a tongue-in-cheek look at, times gone past. But there's an application for us. There's an evolving that goes on in all of us, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And today we want to learn about being ready. We want to learn what you are about and how we can bring that into our everyday. God, there may be people here who have never been here before, people that have been following you for a long time. There's something for us. We're supposed to be here. We love you and we pray this in your name. Amen. So, we're going to be in Psalm 93, again, middle of the Bible. If you cracked it open in the Old Testament, you'd run across them. If you don't have your own copy of the Bible, we give out free easy-to-read versions of the Bible at our Get Connected table out in the lobby, which has actually become a Get Connected area, kind of split up the table. When you walked in, you may have seen this big banner that said Forefront Life University on it, and that's kind of the area where we're kind of signifying where all of our summer classes are being signed up for that we're offering this year. And we started last week. We had a whole bunch of people come in for the couple classes that we started. First of all, if you signed up for all of those, well over 100 of you, great. I'm very, very proud of you for doing that. You're going to be better going to those classes. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you should check it out afterwards because we're going to have them through the whole summer. And the idea here is to grow closer to God and just be better, and that's what we're aiming for. So there's free Bibles out there. You should get one if you don't have one and take it. But we are not in the 90s. We are in a very technologically savvy period of time now, so we have digital versions of the Bible that you can get at forefrontchurch.info. And besides Bibles there, you can take notes about what you might hear today. You can sign up for events. You can see what's going on. You can kind of connect yourself to the goings-on of the church and what is going on with God. What we want to try and do is eliminate any obstacle between you and figuring out what faith might look for you. So, we're going to be in Psalm 93. It'll be up here on the screen. I'm going to read it, 5 little verses, pretty powerful stuff, beginning in verse 1. Here we go. The Lord reigns. He is robed in majesty. The Lord is robed in majesty and armed with strength. Indeed, the world is established, firm and secure. Your throne was established long ago. You are from all eternity. The seas have lifted up, Lord. The seas have lifted up their voice. The seas have lifted up their pounding waves, mightier than the thunder of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty. Your statutes, Lord, stand firm. Holiness adorns your house for endless days. Love Psalm 93. Very, very simple theme here. Starts out at the very beginning. The Lord reigns. He's powerful. He's capable. There is security there. You don't walk away from Psalm 93 thinking, I'm not sure God's got this. No, you walk away from Psalm 93 thinking, He's in control. He's able. He has the ability to kind of walk us through the different things that are going on in our world and what we're going to face. And this is really important in light of what Jason talked about last week. He kicked off our 5-week series, I love the 90s, and he started, and he gave us 2 questions to kind of challenge us through the rest of the 5 weeks of the series. And he said, in your life with God, question number 1, are you ready? Are you ready? And the second question was, how will you live your life in light of how you answer question number 1? And that's really good when we tie this to Psalm 93, because what we read in Psalm 93 from the very, very beginning is that God is mighty. And it has some good descriptive language in there about who He is and what He's about. It talks about Him being robed in majesty twice. It talks Him being firm and secure and eternal. But then we get to verses 3 and 4. And we get this illustration of waves, of rough water, thunderous, pounding waves. And then at the very end of that, it says that not even those are mightier than God. Now, those of you that have been going to church for a while or know the Bible really well, you would look at Psalm 93 and go, well, this is a short one. This is easy. The Lord reigns. There are storms. He's mightier than the storms. God's got it. Slap the table and you're good. We just walk away. It's okay, right? It's awesome. You got it figured out. But let's step back, because we can drive by this. Because if you've never been in an open sea before, you may just completely overlook it. What does it say? The very first 3 words, the Lord reigns. The Lord reigns. What does that mean? Add that to the 2 questions that Jason gave us. Are you ready? How will you live your life in light of question number 1? So we need to attach those 2. And here's what I want you to think about. When you get up in the morning and you put your feet on the floor, what do you think about? What's your going in position? What's your plan? What's reigning in your life at that moment? When you think about everything that you have to do, some of you know you got to wrangle kids, you got jobs, you have responsibilities, you have places you need to be, maybe you're going to school. I don't know what it is for you. But what is the course that you have charted for that day? How much do you think about what you're doing? What is reigning, driving, overseeing your movement through your day? What's your plan? And you might be thinking, it's just a day. I just go to work. What's the big deal? No, think about it. What is, from the minuscule annoyance that you're going to encounter to the very, very tragic that could happen, what's your plan? Because you can get up on Wednesday and think, man, Monday and Tuesday were rough. You might have another Monday. You don't know. What's your plan? So what I would like to do maybe is, I thought we'd get a little nautical today. Are you okay with talking a little nautical stuff? Okay, so let's get a little nautical. Let's paint a picture here. So right now, across the globe, there are Navy ships, U.S. Navy ships, all over the place. And they are out there doing their thing. And there's a really good chance that some of them are encountering heavy weather as we speak right now. Waves, really heavy weather, and it might look something like this. And just to give you a reference point, this picture is not crooked. This is the horizon right here. That means that what these guys are standing on is not level. Okay? It's rough right there. But they're out there and they're doing it. They may be trying to prepare that helicopter to launch. I don't know what it is. We have some pilots that go to this church here who tell you how much fun that may not be. But we have ships all over the place right now, at sea right now, dealing with all kinds of conditions. And these are not supermen out here. You do know that these guys can get seasick, right? Have you ever been seasick before? Is anybody? Okay, well, let me tell you, that is not a good feeling to have, being seasick. But they have a readiness thing that they have to be thinking about. They have to be out there doing their thing. And they have to do it even when they're seasick. Now, I never really got seasick. There were a couple times I came really close, but I was one of those people who did not get sick, which is awesome. Because when it gets really rough, I mean really, really, really rough, and people start getting seasick, they disappear. All of a sudden, where is everybody? They're all sick, which is really great if you're on a ship because all the lines are short. There's like plenty of food. You know, all those people, like when you're on one of these ships with people for a long time in a concentrated environment, there are some annoying people. And you have nowhere to go. I mean, you could throw yourself overboard, if I guess. But it could, so secretly you're hoping the annoying people get seasick, and they do. But then you have to take up their slack. You have to do their job for them. And it's really hard. There's some people who are in critical jobs on ships right now who are seasick, who cannot be in the rack in bed chilling out. They have to be working. Now, back in my day, they would, strap a plastic bag to their belt and throw up in that while they were doing their job. That's what's happening right now. There was a guy on one of my ships. He was the ship's navigator. He had to be up on the bridge where you control everything 24/7 to get the ship from point A to point B. We were in rough weather for like 8 days, but this guy used to get sick as soon as we left the pier. That's the way it was for him. I have to this day never seen a human being throw up that much, before or since, like 8 days straight. His name was Stu. We renamed him Spew. That's how much he threw up. But it's hard. And when people go out there and they do the things that have to be done out in the maritime services like this, the American people have an expectation that the Navy is going to go out and be ready and do what they need to do, and by and large, they do. Things happen all the time on these ships. There are near, accidents, or sometimes there's smaller accidents. There's things that happen, but you know what they do? They just take care of it, and they do it every single day, and they're doing it right now. And there's one reason why they do it, and it's called readiness. They're ready. They don't get ready when they go out there. They're ready when they're out there. And this is a takeaway I would like you to have for you to walk away with today. I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about your readiness to go through your life, to go through the daily grind or the monthly grind or whatever, the things that you're going through. How are you evolving through your life? This is what I want you to take with you. Your readiness rests in a God who reigns. You need to draw a path and a course for your life from something. And I'm arguing here that God is what you need to draw from. That the readiness that you have to handle anything, from the most minute to the most complex, you're going to draw from God. Think back to those verses of Psalm 93, those 5 little verses and what they said. Going back to our nautical theme for a minute here. Navy ships that are out there right now are ready. I showed you pictures of 4 ships up here. All 4 of them have a completely different mission from each other, but there are some central fundamental things that are done on those ships regardless of what their mission is. There are procedures, there are instructions, there are traditions that are passed down. There are certain things, precepts that you do because people didn't before and were injured or killed over decades and centuries of maritime practice. Readiness. There's certain things that you have to do every single time before you go out. You could say, well, we're not going to hit rough weather. It doesn't matter. You prepare like you're going to hit anything. And it's very tedious. And when you're a young sailor, you're tired of people telling you to take care of all this stuff. And when you become more senior, you're a leader, all you're doing is walking around telling people to fix stuff to make sure that you're 100% ready to go. Now, our ships are built to withstand combat damage. They are not like commercial ships. They're built very, very differently. They're much more watertight, and they can handle damage. And they're also built to handle weather. Like if you've ever walked on a Navy ship before, you're going to look at that. If you ever get on there any time in your life, and you should check it out, you're going to notice things are bolted down. They're chained down. They're strapped down. They're taped down. Now they're Velcroed down. Stand there long enough, you might get taped down. I don't know. But everything has its place. You don't leave things laying out. You don't leave something where it's not supposed to be. You put it right back where it's supposed to go because you have to be ready. The material condition of that ship has to be ready. You can't have stuff flying around just because you hit some weather because somebody didn't put something back. This is very, very important because the United States of America has national interests that we are tasked with going out and doing in the military. Every one of the ships in the Navy, the condition of them by law is reported to Congress. So Congress periodically knows what every single ship's condition is so that it can go out and do what it needs to do. So it has to be ready. And that's what the crew does. There are navigational concerns when you leave the pier and you go out. You might hit some rough weather. You might have to navigate the ship differently. You just don't drive into it. If in really, really violent weather, I have turned ships to go down sea with a following wind so we could serve the crew a meal. That's what you do. But you always keep the mission first. You always march forward, and you're ready. The crews on these ships are ready because they know if they're not going to be able to do their job. So there's an overarching principle here. There's a pathway, there's a procedure, there's wisdom, there's statutes that are in place that you draw from to be able to have a reigning principle to walk through your life. That's true of a sailor, and that's true of us in our lives. What's the point? Let's go back to the psalm, the very beginning. The Lord reigns. And then you get a little bit of his resume. He's robed in majesty. Says it twice. Armed with strength. The world is established, firm and secure. His throne was established long ago, eternally. He is qualified to oversee the affairs of man. So why would we not walk out our lives with him, drawing from him, walking out the door in the morning, having him and what he says and how he says it with us? Because here's the deal. There is chaos. That's that whole thunderous, pounding waves, chaos. We've all been there. We all go through things. It feels like we're being overwhelmed. You know, when I'm very stressed and I'm feeling the pressure of, you name it, it could be simple or it could be tragic. For me, my ears ring, my head swims a little bit, my stomach flops around a little bit. There's chaos. It just doesn't feel right. So I have to respond. What am I going to react? How am I going to react? What am I going to pull from? And when you read the description in verses 3 and 4 of these waves, what you read at the very end of it is, it's sort of like, it can get as big as it wants. When the waves break, and we know what breaking waves are, we live at the beach, right? Every time one falls onto the beach, that's a breaking wave. When they break, where do they break? Where do they break for you in your life? Where do they break for God? They don't break on top of God, they break before him. See, God is never going to sit around and let chaos reign. Now, you can walk through your life and completely, give the Heisman to God and not bother, and you'll be overcome. Or you can invoke him as his reigning principle in your life, and you will see it differently. It says it right here, if you look back in verse 5, the very last verse of this psalm, your statutes, Lord, stand firm. Holiness adorns your house for endless days. Every week we stand up and we talk about we would love to give you a free Bible. All you have to do is go out to the Get Connected table in the lobby. You can take one. Digital versions right here at fortfrontchurch.info. These are the statutes and precepts that I'm talking about. When you take this stuff inside of you and you let it become part of your DNA, when you could go 100 days and never have an issue, and then all of a sudden something happens, you don't react, you respond out of your readiness. That's what God is saying in this psalm. Holiness adorns your house for the end of those days. That means forever. Holiness is perfection. So the question is, will you become seaworthy? Will you become seaworthy? You know what our Navy does when it sits in port? It gets ready. Yes, people take time off, but they're repairing, they're replenishing, they're training, they're fixing, they're storing, they're getting better, they're deepening that thickness of qualifications so when they get out there, they can do what they need to do. It's the same principle for us with God. We need to take the good times and not say, oh, God's great, I'll just go do whatever. No, that's the time we need to dig in and we need to learn and we need to train and we need to get ready. Because it's going to happen. You're going to hit the rough way. It's going to happen. So are you going to just continue and just leave port without bothering? Or are you going to take these times of easy, calm waters and get better? So when it does happen, you're ready. Your readiness rests in a God who reigns. So tomorrow when you wake up, what are you going to do? What's going to drive you? What's going to move you? What is going to reign? February 11th, 1983, the steamship Marine Electric leaves Norfolk, 605 feet long, with 25,000 tons of coal on board, and it makes its way out of the Chesapeake Bay to head up to Massachusetts to drop off the coal. That was its job. And it was so easy they called it a milk run, like the dairy guy who just runs around and delivers milk. All they did was deliver coal. Crew of 34 leaves on February 11th. They get outside the Chesapeake Bay, right off the resort strip here, and they start encountering high seas. They're building from 20 feet to 30 feet to 40 feet. The air temperature is 28 degrees. The sea temperature is 39 degrees. It's rough. And the reason why I know this is I was on a Navy ship right off the coast here doing local operations. Ship that I was on at the time was the second largest class of ship in the Navy, 60,000 tons, 800 feet long. We were like a floating Walmart for the fleet. Like we had everything. And that was our job, just to give the fleet stuff. So as the Marine Electric clears Chesapeake Bay, they're directed to a fishing boat that is having some trouble in the heavy weather. And the Coast Guard asks them to go hang out with the fishing boat, make communication, make sure everything's good. So they get there and they're with the fishing boat and they start to notice that the ship is getting heavy. There's a feeling you have underneath your feet when you're driving a big ship and you can start to tell if something's wrong and they're getting heavy. And they realize that they're taking on some water and they think they're just taking on the water because it's rough out there. So they ask permission from the Coast Guard to continue up the coast to get to Massachusetts to offload their coal. And then in the early morning of February 12th, they issued a distress signal that they were taking on water and they needed help. And the ship that I was on was sent to rendezvous with them to try and help them and see what the deal was. But by the time we got there, there was no ship to find because they took water in and they sunk. They rolled over to starboard with 34 crew members trying to put a boat in the water, and the ship rolled over on top of them. 34 went into the water and 3 came out. And I remember thinking when that happened, because I was 20 years old. I'd only been in the Navy a couple years, and incredibly heavy weather. There were only a couple times after that it even got close to that. And I remember thinking, man, this is just incredible. I had a watch station I had to go to. It was near the forward end of the ship, and I was inside the ship, and we were pitching so violently, our feet would go out from underneath us. And this was a massive ship we were on. That's how bad it was. So I remember thinking, this is really bad. And when you're in a situation like that in a ship When something really bad is happening, it gets very quiet. There's nobody joking around, playing around. It's just very serious. And we knew it was. But when we learned why the Marine Electric sank, there isn't a moment in my career that brought home readiness, the importance of it, clearer than that. I never questioned it again after that accident. See, what happened was they had these big, gigantic deck hatches that they would open up to load the ship with coal. Well, the ship was 40 years old. It was built in 1944, and the hatches had gotten old and rusty, and it had holes in them. And at the time, in the 70s and 80s, the Coast Guard was delegating responsibility for inspections to shipping companies and the American Bureau of Shipping. So the company that had the bottom line to meet was doing the inspections, so they weren't really doing the inspections. And the crew knew that the ship had holes in it, and the shipping company knew that the seaworthiness of the ship wasn't good. In fact, the crew used duct tape and a substance called Bondo. Some of you guys that are older that know used to fix car bodies, and they used Bondo to try and patch the holes. But when they got out there and they got into the sea state that they were in, and the waves started coming over, it completely filled the ship. They got lulled into this idea that it was just another day. Nothing was raining that was telling them to get back to the standards that they needed to be at so they wouldn't die. It's a terrible, terrible story. It's so sad what happened to them. And I think it's instructive for our life to look at this, because they left in a completely unseaworthy condition, something that they could have been completely avoided. It was a senseless loss of life. And I'm wondering, when we get up in the morning and we start to walk through our lives, and we just walk out the door, we have no plan, nothing is really reigning in our lives, or at some point God did, but everything's good now, so I don't really follow him much, and I'll call on him when things get really bad. But you know what happens? We're taking on water sometimes. We don't even see it. Sometimes it's really subtle. That ship sunk off of Chincoteague Island, less than 30 miles from the coast and 120 feet of water. They literally said in the accident investigation that the crew believed the Coast Guard, if they ever had trouble, would just come out and get them. But the ship sunk too fast. So look at your life, because our attitude will cause us to drift. We will think that everything is good, but we will drift away. And the next thing you know, we're putting duct tape over our sarcasm and our unkindness and our lack of empathy. We'll walk around and, we'll just say whatever we want to our kids and our wives and our bosses. We'll look at a job and go, it's just temporary. Why should I care? We'll bondo over our addictions or our anger or whatever. And we just think we're going to be good. We will become unseaworthy if we're not watching, if we don't adhere to some level of readiness. And this is why God's so important, because he has to be this for us to be able to really live. It couldn't be any other way. So now what? Well, let's go back to our illustration of what happened with the Marine Electric. Right after that accident happened, it was and remains the most catastrophic accident in American commercial shipping history. Right after that, the Coast Guard tightened up their inspection criteria. They took it back. They no longer let the companies do it themselves. And you'll watch like those, Discovery Channel shows with the deadliest catch and lower the Coast Guard guy down in the water. That program did not exist before this ship sank. The reason why some of those guys died is because they were so hypothermic they could not get in the basket on their own. So they created the Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer Program. And what the shipping industry did was said, we need to get back to basic levels of readiness. We need to make readiness important again. We need to shift our mindset to what we know is true and enduring and tried and true and proven, and that's the way we need to conduct our business. This cannot happen again. And that is great hope. That is great hope for them, and that same message can apply for us. It's great hope for us too. We can say, from this moment, the Lord is going to reign in my life, and I'm going to reach for his level of readiness and not my own. I'm going to shift my mindset today because I'm sinking and I'm taking on water and my life is not seaworthy. Here's the deal. God created you. You're precious. He wouldn't go through all that trouble to just watch you glide through life not really caring. He wants you in the best condition you can be, not only for your legacy as a person and as a family member, but for a world that desperately needs to meet some human being that actually loves and cares for God and lives that out in their life. And that's what he wants. Which brings us all the way back to the very beginning when we started. Question number 1, are you ready? And question number 2, how will you live your life in light of how you answered question number 1? So I would ask you, are you willing to do a couple of things? Are you willing to start your day with God? That before you do anything, you would take some time to read and pray, and the big one, reflect what you have just read. How will that show up in your life? Will there be any evidence that God is reigning in your life when you start to develop that practice? Because you know what will happen once it gets ingrained in you? You'll reach for it all the time. Just like those guys that are out there doing their thing. They know what they need to do right when it happens. Will you ingrain yourself enough with that so that wisdom and prudent actions come through from God other than what you would want? Commit your actions. Can you commit your actions to behave and speak and act and live and respond as though God reigns in your life? Can that become real? And you know, you can turn it on today and say, I'm going to shift my mindset. It won't be perfected tomorrow. It won't be perfected the day after. It may take 100 days or 1,000 days or 10,000 days, but over time it will become second nature for you to respond out of the readiness that God provides you. But you have to seek the basics of the faith to do that. The only way that the Coast Guard got their stuff together was when they took an action and committed to making sure that that's how they do it. And we'll do it. That's what we can do in our lives as well with God. And finally, learn the fundamental wisdom. You need to learn what's in here. Not the highlights, not what somebody tells you. You need to get in there and actually do an active, structured plan and figure out what's in there and how that applies to your life. And if you're struggling with who God is, let's help you figure that one out. Or if you think you know and you're having trouble, let us help you figure that out. That's why we're here, because the Lord reigns. And he says it in his verses. Stand firm. Seek his kind of seaworthiness, which means you're going to evolve inwardly. I want you to look back on this moment 5 years from now and go, man, game changer. That's what I want for you. And as an old sailor, I would tell you, may you have fair winds and following seas. And I thank you for listening to me today. Let's pray.
Thanks for tuning in to the Forefront Church video podcast. Our hope and prayer is that this has left you encouraged and challenged you in your faith. And you might have some questions and some ways that you want to figure this out, and we want to help with that. Head over to forefrontchurch.info, and there's a couple different ways that you can connect. Click the Connect tab and let us know how we can be praying for you, or a staff member can be contacting you this week. Maybe you have just been encouraged by this and want to support the ministry here at Forefront Church. You can click the Giving tab, as well as other tabs that are in there to help you along in your journey with God. And so we're thankful for you. Thanks for tuning in, and we cannot wait to see you again here online on the video podcast. We love you, and we'll see you then.